They pinned the young disabled woman to her chair, forcing her to watch as her loyal service dog, the only soul who understood her pain without words, was beaten to the ground. His cries echoed across the quiet park, while the wealthy attackers laughed, certain their family influence would erase every crime they committed. But fate had other plans, because at that very moment, a Marine in full uniform was running his daily route, a man trained to face darkness without hesitation. And he saw everything. What happened next would teach those men a lesson money could never erase. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more powerful true-life stories. Golden afternoon light filtered softly through the long curtains of Spanish moss that hung from ancient oak trees in Forsyth Park. Beneath that gentle glow sat Iris Parker, a young woman with features that caught the eye the moment one looked at her. Her beauty carried a delicate, almost angelic quality. Long, soft blonde hair that framed a heart-shaped face, pale skin that held the faint warmth of morning light, and clear blue eyes that always seemed to hold both curiosity and quiet, unspoken sorrow. The thin straps of her simple summer dress brushed against her shoulders as she leaned forward in her wheelchair, her small hands guiding a paintbrush slowly across the canvas. Painting was the only way she felt whole after the car accident that had taken the mobility of her legs 2 years earlier. Beside her lay Valor, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a thick coat of black and tan fur, calm amber eyes, and the noble bearing of a guardian who understood the weight of responsibility. Valor was highly trained as a mobility assist dog, but he was much more than that. To Iris, he was home, comfort, and the one steady presence that had kept her heart from collapsing during the darkest year of rehabilitation after the accident. He lay with his chest pressed to the grass, ears occasionally twitching, sensing every movement around them. The park was quiet except for families strolling, the distant laughter of children near the fountain, and the soft rustle of leaves that danced lazily in the warm breeze. For a moment, Iris felt peaceful. She breathed deeply, letting the scent of warm earth and blooming jasmine fill her lungs. She whispered to Valor that this was the perfect place for inspiration today. Valor wagged his tail in a slow, affectionate rhythm. Then came the sound that made both of them look up. It was the sharp, careless laughter of young men who believed the world belonged to them simply because no one had ever told them otherwise. 3 figures approached along the path. Preston Davenport walked in front, and even from a distance Iris recognized the type instantly. 19 years old, tall, with perfectly styled sandy blonde hair and an expensive designer shirt, Preston carried himself with the arrogance of someone raised in luxury without consequence. His angular jaw was clean-shaven, his skin bronzed from coastal vacations, and his smile was a cold, performative curl of entitlement. Behind him were his 2 friends. Chad Whitmore was broad-shouldered with a thick neck and buzzed dark hair, a young man whose expression often suggested he mistook cruelty for confidence. Brody Mills, thinner and lanky with messy brown hair and timid eyes, followed like someone who never knew how to say no to the wrong people. Iris felt her stomach tighten, an old familiar anxiety that came whenever unknown men approached too quickly. Preston announced their arrival with a mocking grin. He commented loudly on her wheelchair, then on her painting, then on how quiet she looked, as if silence was a flaw he was entitled to correct. Iris tried to ignore them at first, focusing on her canvas, but the boys moved closer, much closer. Preston suddenly reached down and grabbed her bag of brushes. Iris gasped and pulled back, her breath trembling. Chad stepped behind her wheelchair and pressed down lightly on the handles, preventing her from moving. The pressure was enough to awaken a deep fear inside her chest. Valor stood immediately. His fur bristled, his body curved protectively in front of Iris as he growled, low and warning. Preston laughed as if Valor's bravery amused him. He leaned forward and gripped the thin strap of Iris's dress at her shoulder. He yanked it in a rough, jerking motion that tore it at the seam. She cried out and clutched the fabric to her chest, shaking. It was not a sexual act, but an act of dominance meant to humiliate, meant to make her feel powerless in the way bullies love most. Valor lunged. The dog moved with the explosive force of instinct, leaping between Iris and her attackers. He barked, deep and fierce, his body ready to defend her with everything he had. Chad, startled, grabbed the baseball bat he had carried from earlier practice. Without thinking, he swung downward. The wooden bat cracked against Valor's front leg. A sickening sound followed. Valor yelped and collapsed to the side, his body curling in pain. Iris screamed a raw, desperate sound. She tried to push her wheels forward, but Chad held her chair tightly. Preston smiled as if her fear confirmed everything he loved about having power over others. Before the next strike could fall, the atmosphere of the park changed entirely. A man sprinted across the grass with the focused momentum of a predator who had heard the cry of prey. His movements were direct, efficient, silent even in urgency. This was Hugo Scott, a 32-year-old United States Marine. He had the unmistakable bearing of someone who had spent years in disciplined training. His body was lean and powerful, his shoulders broad, and his face rugged with sharp cheekbones, short brown hair, and a faint stubble along his jaw. His eyes, dark steel gray, carried a depth shaped by long deployments, loss of brothers in arms, and the constant weight of responsibility that Marines carry into every room. He reached them faster than any of the boys could react. Hugo seized the arm holding the bat, twisted it behind Chad's back, and pinned him to the ground with precise technique. Preston swung a wild punch that Hugo deflected before driving a firm elbow into Preston's chest, knocking the breath from him. Brody stumbled backward, but Hugo swept his leg, sending him sprawling. In less than 10 seconds, all three boys were subdued. Hugo used a spare length of climbing rope from his running pack to bind Preston's wrists. The boys cried out in shock, but none dared resist. Iris watched everything with tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching Valor's fur as the dog whimpered softly. Her chest felt tight, yet she also felt an overwhelming sense of relief as Hugo turned toward her. His expression softened instantly when he saw her terror. He crouched beside her, one hand steady and reassuring near her shoulder. His voice was gentle, calm, utterly certain. "You are safe now." The morning sun rose slowly over Savannah, muted behind a thin veil of clouds that softened the world into pale gold. The air held a faint coolness, the kind that lingered after a long night of fear, as though the city itself mourned what had been done. Iris Parker sat in the passenger seat of Hugo Scott's truck, her hands resting in her lap, fingers interlaced tightly as if she feared the simple act of letting go would make her fall apart. Her eyes, still swollen from the night before, stayed fixed on the window, watching the passing houses blur into streaks of color. Valor lay across the back seat, his breathing shallow but steady, his injured leg wrapped in a clean bandage. He looked smaller than usual, curled tightly into himself, his amber eyes lifting now and then toward Iris as if to reassure her he was still here. Hugo drove in silence. He understood that sometimes silence was not absence, but a shelter. The Marine's face, angular and shadowed by rough stubble, was locked in a calm that hid the storm brewing beneath it. He kept glancing at Iris from the corner of his eye, studying the tremble in her shoulders, the stiffness of her posture, the way she held her breath whenever Valor whimpered. They soon arrived at the veterinary emergency clinic. The smell of disinfectant and warm fur drifted through the air as Hugo gently lifted Valor and carried him inside. Iris followed closely behind him, her wheels moving slowly across the sterile white tile. Dr. Elias Turner met them in the exam room. A man in his late 50s, he had a thin, graceful frame and soft silver hair that curled slightly above his ears. His skin bore the faint texture of age, the lines around his eyes creasing with sympathy rather than exhaustion. Decades of tending to injured animals had given him a gentleness that felt almost paternal. His voice was calm and deep, the kind that made frightened creatures relax, and he addressed Valor with practiced ease. "Let's take a look at you, boy," he murmured, running his hands delicately along the dog's ribs and leg. Valor whined, but did not snap. His trust in Iris extended toward those she trusted. Dr. Turner nodded slowly as he finished examining the leg. "The bone is fractured, but there is no nerve damage. With rest and proper care, he'll recover." Iris let out a sound that was almost a sob of relief. Hugo closed his eyes briefly, letting tension drain from his shoulders. While Valor was treated and sedated, Hugo guided Iris outside for fresh air. The morning breeze brushed her hair, lifting it gently as she looked up at him. Her voice trembled. "How do people like them get to do things like this?" Hugo leaned against the railing, his strong frame rigid. "Some people grow up thinking the world will always protect them," he said quietly. "Those people become dangerous when they think they can do anything without consequences." Iris lowered her eyes. "I don't want to be scared of them. I don't want to hide." "Then we won't hide," Hugo said. His voice held the steady conviction of a man who had made impossible promises before and kept them. "We'll report everything. We'll file charges, and we'll make sure someone listens." Later that afternoon, after Valor was discharged with pain medication and a temporary splint, Hugo drove Iris to the Savannah Police Precinct. The building loomed tall and weathered, an older structure with stone steps and glass doors that reflected the cloudy sky. Iris hesitated at the entrance. The police station felt cold and indifferent, not a place of safety, but of bureaucracy. She swallowed hard and tightened her grip on the armrest of her wheelchair. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with subdued noise, phones ringing, voices murmuring, the shuffle of papers. A desk clerk directed them to an office at the back, where the deputy chief would take the report. Hugo placed a supportive hand on the back of Iris's chair as they entered the room. Deputy Chief Raymond Holt sat behind a large mahogany desk. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with thinning gray hair combed back neatly, a rounded jaw softened by age, and a pair of steel-framed glasses perched low on his nose. His uniform was pressed meticulously, but the man inside it carried an air of fatigue. His eyes, dark and unreadable, studied them with a hint of distant politeness that never reached sincerity. "Good afternoon," he said with a smooth voice shaped by years of administrative diplomacy. "I understand you wish to file a formal assault complaint. Please, have a seat." Hugo remained standing. Iris rolled closer. She described the attack at the park. She described the tearing of her clothes, the attempt to overturn her wheelchair, Preston's threats, the way they had held her trapped. Her voice cracked when she recounted Valor's cry of pain as the bat struck his leg. Hugo's hands curled slowly into fists at his sides. Deputy Chief Holt listened without interrupting, only occasionally nodding or scribbling a note. His expression softened at all the appropriate moments. But Iris noticed, with mounting unease, the way he avoided meeting her gaze. When she finished, Holt exhaled as though burdened by a great inconvenience. "Miss Parker, I'm very sorry this happened to you. Truly. But you must understand, these kinds of cases can be complicated." Iris blinked. "Complicated? They attacked me. They attacked my dog." Holt cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair. "The Davenport family is well known in Savannah. Very influential. And the boys involved, well, they insist you provoked the situation." Hugo stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. "She was sitting alone in a park. That's all she did." Holt lifted a placating hand. "I'm not saying I agree with them. I'm simply explaining that, legally, testimonies can conflict. These things take time to sort out." Iris felt her throat tighten. "So you won't file the report?" "I didn't say that," Holt replied, quickly. "I will file it. But I'm telling you this for your own good. Withdrawing the complaint might make things easier. For everyone." Iris stared at him, disbelief turning into cold fear. Easier for who? Holt smiled thinly, folding his hands atop his desk. "For you, Miss Parker. These families tend to have long memories. Conflicts like this can escalate." Hugo's voice vibrated with barely restrained anger. "Are you threatening her?" Deputy Chief Holt straightened, his expression tightening. "I'm offering advice. Nothing more. You are, of course, free to do as you choose." Iris shook her head slowly. "I'm not dropping anything." Holt sighed, pretending disappointment. "Very well, I'll process the paperwork. But I hope you understand the difficulties ahead." As they left the station, Iris felt as though the building itself had exhaled a dark warning behind them. Hugo walked beside her silently until they reached the parking lot. Then he knelt in front of her, bringing his face level with hers. "You were brave in there. Braver than anyone had the right to expect after what happened." Iris lifted her gaze, meeting the storm lingering in his steel-gray eyes. "I don't feel brave. Courage isn't never being afraid," he murmured. "It's choosing to keep going anyway. And you just did that." As they drove away, Iris looked at the precinct shrinking in the rearview mirror. She didn't know what the next days would bring, but one thing had become unmistakably clear. The justice system she was taught to trust would not protect her. And still, she refused to bend. Night returned to Savannah with a heaviness that pressed low against the streets, muting the colors of the historic houses and turning every alley into a darkened hollow. The air tasted faintly metallic, as though carrying the memory of an approaching storm. Iris Parker wheeled herself down the sidewalk outside her small apartment building, the plastic bag of groceries resting lightly on her knees. Her mind was exhausted, worn thin by an entire day spent fighting systems built to ignore her. She paused under a flickering street lamp, rubbing her arms as a breeze cut through the humid night. Hugo had offered to walk her home, but she insisted she could make the short trip alone. Maybe a small part of her wanted to prove to herself that she wasn't as breakable as the world believed. Yet another part, the quiet, trembling part, missed his steady presence beside her. She entered the building through the front door and waited for the elevator, tapping her fingers anxiously on her lap. Something felt wrong tonight. She couldn't name it, couldn't rationalize it, but the unease prickled her skin like static. When the elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, she let out a shaky breath and crossed the threshold. 3 floors above her, in the dim hallway near her apartment, a man stood with his back pressed against a peeling wall. Dorian Pike, a silent watcher contracted for jobs he never spoke about, had arrived minutes earlier. Dorian was in his early 40s, tall with narrow shoulders and a face carved into sharp planes. His hair was dark and slicked back, revealing a widow's peak that gave him a predatory silhouette. A thin scar cut from the corner of his mouth down to his jaw, a remnant of a bar fight many years ago, a fight he had started and won. His eyes were a muted hazel, unreadable and cold. He wasn't alone. 2 younger men lingered near him, their movements tense with inexperience. One was Kyle Mercer, a wiry 28-year-old with patchy facial hair, pockmarked skin, and darting brown eyes that never seemed to focus long on anything. The other, Ralph Benton, was heavier set, with a round face and thick brows that made him look perpetually confused. They both wore dark hoodies and gloves, their pockets bulging with tools they barely knew how to use. Dorian, however, knew precisely what he was doing. He calmly tested the lock of the side entrance to Iris's unit, a small maintenance door meant for movers, and inserted a thin metal tool. The lock gave way with a soft click. No alarms, no witnesses, no hesitation. Inside the apartment, the soft scent of linseed oil and dried paint filled the air, notes of Iris's creative world. The space was warm, colorful, alive with half-finished canvases that leaned against the walls like waiting stories. Brushes lay neatly arranged on her work table, pigments sealed in glass jars that glimmered under the dim overhead light. It was a sanctuary built from patience and suffering. Dorian looked at it once, briefly, and then gave a simple nod. "Do it." The 2 younger men sprang into motion, clumsy but eager. Kyle seized a wooden easel and smashed it against the floor, splintering it into jagged pieces. Ralph grabbed a jar of cadmium red paint, hurling it against the wall. It exploded into a violent bloom of crimson that dripped like fresh wounds. Dorian moved more slowly, methodically. He lifted a palette knife from the table, a tool meant for blending colors, and dragged it across a canvas that depicted the old oaks of Forsyth Park. The blade sliced cleanly through the painted surface, carving new scars over scenes Iris had once crafted with love. Paint spilled, wood broke, beauty died, and above it all, the sound of their destruction collided with the quiet hum of the night like a muffled scream. When they finished, Dorian stepped back and surveyed the room. It looked ravaged, violated, perfect. Pulling a small can of red spray paint from his coat, he shook it once. The sound echoed like a rattle of bones. With deliberate strokes, he scrawled words across the largest white wall, jagged, dripping warnings designed to break her spirit. Next time, it won't just be your art. Then he led the others out through the same side door, leaving the apartment silent and still, like a crime scene waiting for its witness. Minutes later, Iris exited the elevator, her wheels humming softly against the floor. She hummed quietly to herself, trying to shake the tension lingering overhead. The hallway was still, too still. She unlocked her door and pushed it open, and the world split open at her feet. Her breath vanished. It was not just a mess, it was devastation. Her easels lay in mangled heaps, paint smeared across the floor like spilled blood. Canvas after canvas lay torn, shredded into ribbons of color and cloth. Her tools were twisted, broken, violated. And the red writing on the wall, hateful, dripping, hit her like a physical blow. For a long moment she couldn't move. Her fingers slipped from the wheels. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest as numbness spread through her limbs. Her vision blurred. Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. This wasn't vandalism. This was a message meant to crush her. Finally, with trembling hands, she pulled out her phone. She didn't call the police. She didn't call the building manager. She called Hugo. The moment her voice cracked, a broken whisper of his name, Hugo Scott was already running. He reached her building in minutes. His boots thundered up the stairs, and when he stepped into her doorway, the destruction reflected in his eyes like a battlefield he had seen too many times before. His jaw tightened. His chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths, the kind of control that barely kept violence restrained. But when he approached Iris, his voice softened to something almost fragile. "Hey, I'm here now." He knelt beside her, placing one steady hand over hers. "You're not alone in this. Not anymore." The night wind slid through the shattered window frames of Iris's apartment, carrying with it the faint smell of the river and the metallic tang of fear. Hugo stood in the wreckage while Iris sat motionless in her wheelchair, her hands trembling faintly in her lap. The ruined canvases lay around them like fallen wings. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence held everything: devastation, shock, and the unspoken fear that this violence was only the beginning. Hugo crouched in front of her. His presence was heavy, steady, like an anchor thrown into a storm. His gray eyes softened as they met hers. "Tell me what hurts." Iris shook her head, incapable of sorting the emotions flooding through her. She could barely breathe. It wasn't the materials or the hours of work destroyed. It was the sense of being hunted, cornered, erased. Hugo gently placed a hand on the armrest of her wheelchair, not touching her, but close enough that she felt anchored again. "Iris, this wasn't random. They want to break you, and they think fear will do it." A tear slid down her cheek. "I don't know how to fight people like them. Then we find someone who does." Hugo stood and took out his phone. His fingers moved with the certainty of someone who had made difficult calls in darker nights. After a few rings, a deep voice answered. The next morning, just after sunrise, a tall man in a charcoal suit walked briskly toward Iris's apartment building. His stride was confident, his posture upright, and his expression was cut from stone. This was Franklin Ward, a former military attorney in his late 40s. Broad-shouldered, with streaks of gray through his closely cropped black hair, Franklin carried an air of quiet authority. A thin scar traced from the corner of his right eyebrow down along his cheekbone, a wound he'd earned during a mission years ago when a legal briefing room came under attack. That moment had hardened him, sharpening a once gentle personality into a man with unshakable resolve. He believed fiercely in justice, and fiercely in doing what others thought was impossible. When Franklin entered the ruined apartment, he paused. His dark eyes, sharp, assessing, yet unexpectedly warm, swept across the chaos. He took in the broken furniture, the torn paintings, the slashed canvases, the red words dripping on the wall. His jaw flexed. "They did all this to intimidate you?" he asked quietly. Iris nodded. She felt small under the weight of what she was admitting. "Frankie, they hired people. They knew I wasn't home. They knew exactly how to hurt me." Franklin crouched to examine the spray paint like a detective reading a coded message. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Iris, listen to me. Some men believe their money makes them untouchable. I've spent my career proving those men wrong." Hugo stood behind him, arms crossed, expression somber. He trusted Franklin in a way he trusted very few people. They had served together, overseas, where Franklin's intelligence and Hugo's strength had saved lives more than once. Franklin rose and gently adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket. "We are going to win this, but we need evidence they cannot bury." Hugo said, "You've already filed a report. I'll handle everything from here." Iris looked up at both men, hope flickering faintly beneath her fear. "How can we fight people who have the police on their side?" Franklin offered a calm, steady smile. "Then we don't rely on the police. We find the truth ourselves." The next hours became a whirlwind of movement. Franklin photographed every inch of damage, cataloging each broken brush, every torn canvas, every threatening word. He documented the slashed frames, the boot prints smeared across paint spills, the broken latch on the fire escape window. Then he interviewed neighbors, moving door to door with the precision of someone who understood human nature. His voice was warm yet firm, and people responded to his steadiness. One of those neighbors was Eleanor Marsh, a retired librarian in her 70s. Eleanor was a petite woman with snowy white hair pulled into a neat bun, soft pale skin marked with age spots, and kind blue eyes behind thick reading glasses. She lived alone with her old orange tabby cat, and had the alert caution of someone who had seen too much in a long life. Franklin asked gently whether she'd noticed anything unusual the previous night. Eleanor hesitated, fidgeting with the pearl buttons on her cardigan. "I didn't know who to call," she confessed. "But I heard men upstairs, loud thuds, and I saw someone leave the side door. He had a scar on his jaw and looked very rough." Franklin exchanged a subtle glance with Hugo. Marcus read. It matched the description perfectly. "Did you see anything else, ma'am?" Eleanor bit her lip, then seemed to gather courage. "I think my neighbor across the street has a camera pointed toward the walkway. He told me once he installs them because his tools were stolen a few years back." Franklin straightened immediately. "Where does he live?" They knocked on the door of Samuel Price, a middle-aged handyman with a sturdy build, sun-darkened skin, and calloused fingers that showed a lifetime of working with wood and metal. Samuel was naturally cautious, with thick eyebrows that seemed permanently furrowed, but he was also a fair man who despised bullies. When Franklin explained the situation, Samuel's expression softened. "If someone hurt that girl," he said, voice gravelly and sincere, "I'll help however I can." He led them inside his workshop, past shelves lined with paint cans and power tools. At the back of the room sat a computer hooked to a pair of outdoor security cameras. Samuel clicked through footage, the glow of the screen reflecting off his face. Then they saw it. 3 figures approaching Iris's door. One carrying a bat. One carrying a duffel bag. Marcus read, turning his face slightly toward the camera, the scar along his jaw catching the faint light. The footage continued. Moments later, the men retreated with hurried steps, slipping through the side door again. It was undeniable. Franklin slowly exhaled. This is what we needed. Iris covered her mouth with trembling fingers as she watched the moment that changed her life. Yet beneath her fear, something shifted, a spark of strength returning. Franklin turned to her. "Iris, we take this to court. We expose them. You're not alone in this." Hugo placed a steady hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm, grounding, protective. And for the first time since the attack in the park, Iris felt something unfamiliar rising beneath her fear. Hope. Together, the 3 of them stepped out of Samuel Price's workshop, armed not just with evidence, but with purpose. For the first time, The shadows surrounding Iris began to lift, and the truth, finally, had a voice. The courthouse in downtown Savannah stood like an old sentinel, its white columns gleaming beneath the pale morning sun. Seagulls drifted above the river, their cries carried inland by a soft coastal breeze. The world seemed strangely peaceful for a place where lives were about to be irrevocably changed. Iris Parker waited just beyond the courthouse steps, her wheelchair angled toward the gardens. She wore a simple blue blouse, her golden hair loosely braided, and though the faintest trace of past grief lingered in her eyes, there was newfound strength in the way she held her posture. Valor sat at her side, now stronger, his once injured leg wrapped only in a soft support band. The German shepherd's fur shimmered in the sunlight, and though he still moved gingerly, the spark that defined him had returned. Beside Iris, Hugo Scott stood with quiet confidence. The Marine had traded his uniform for a crisp white shirt and dark slacks. Clean-shaven, except for the shadow along his jawline, he looked simultaneously weary and grounded, a man who had carried too much weight for too long and was finally ready to set it down. He kept one hand resting on Iris's shoulder, a silent message that he wasn't going anywhere. A crowd had gathered. News of the case had spread across the community. Neighbors, artists, veterans, and dog lovers who saw in Iris's story a reflection of every ignored victim, every dismissed voice. Signs like "Justice for Iris" and "Protect Service Animals" rose above the heads of strangers who had chosen to stand with her. The heavy courthouse doors opened, and out stepped Judge Adelaide Monroe, a dignified woman in her early 70s, with silver hair swept neatly into a bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her presence radiated fairness. She had weathered decades of moral storms and emerged with her integrity intact. Today, she carried the expression of someone who had seen through every lie laid before her. Inside the courtroom minutes earlier, Monroe had delivered her verdict in a low, unwavering voice. Preston Davenport and his two accomplices had been found guilty of assault, property destruction, animal cruelty, and intimidation of a disabled individual. She ordered community service, full financial restitution for Valor's medical care, and mandatory rehabilitation programs. Preston, who had tried to hide his trembling under forced arrogance, had been assigned special supervision due to his ongoing threats and reckless disregard for human safety. Now, as Judge Monroe exited the building, the crowd parted for her. She approached Iris directly, offering a rare, gentle smile. "You're the kind of courage this city needs more of, Miss Parker. Don't let anyone dim that." Iris felt her throat tighten, but she managed a soft, breathy thank you. When Monroe stepped away, a wave of relief washed over the square. People clapped, a few cried, Valor barked once, a sharp, victorious sound, and Iris laughed, the sound like sunlight breaking through cloud. Hugo leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair gently from her cheek. "You did it, Iris," he murmured. "Not we. You." Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for the first time since the attack in Forsyth Park, she felt wholly, undeniably safe. "No," she whispered. "We did this." The weeks that followed unfolded like the slow healing of a wound long ignored. Volunteers helped repair her destroyed studio. Artists donated canvases, brushes, pigments. Local carpenters rebuilt her easels. Teens painted new murals across her walls, each stroke an act of defiance against cruelty. But despite the kindness, Iris found herself increasingly restless. The city's noise felt heavier than before. Every alley reminded her of vulnerability. Every shadow seemed too familiar. Late one afternoon, As she sat on her apartment balcony watching the river fade into dusk, she felt Hugo's presence behind her before she heard him speak. His voice was low, gentle with a weight he carried carefully. "You don't want to stay here anymore, do you?" She shook her head. "It's not fear, Hugo, I want peace, really peace. A place where I breathe without thinking someone might take it from me." Hugo stepped closer, resting a hand on the back of her chair. "Then let's find that place. Together." There was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty, only a simple truth spoken aloud. Within a month, they moved to a small coastal town 2 hours south, a quiet place where the ocean murmured against the shore like an endless lullaby. The cottage they found stood on a gentle slope overlooking the water, its white walls weathered by salt and sun, its porch wide enough for sunsets and new beginnings. Valor bounded across the sand the first day they arrived, his gait uneven but joyful. Iris wheeled onto the wooden deck, inhaling deeply. The scent of salt and wild grass filled her lungs. She felt something soften inside her, a letting go she had prayed for. Life shifted into a new rhythm. Each morning, Hugo brewed coffee while the ocean glimmered outside the window. He worked on repairing the cottage fence, muscles taut under the afternoon sun, occasionally glancing her way with that quiet smile that always made her chest flutter. Iris painted again, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. Her brushstrokes carried both sorrow and rebirth, memories of darkness merging with the colors of healing. Valor napped at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to watch gulls drift overhead. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the waves into ribbons of gold, Iris looked at the two souls who had become her tether back to life. "Hugo," she whispered, "thank you for staying." He knelt beside her, eyes soft, voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. "There was never a world where I wouldn't." The wind brushed through them like a quiet blessing. Iris leaned her head gently against Hugo's shoulder, and Valor curled beside them, a warm weight of loyalty and love. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. After all the cruelty, fear, and injustice, they had finally found the one thing the world had tried so hard to take from them: home. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come wrapped in thunder, bright halos, or angelic choirs. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through a wounded dog who refuses to abandon his human, through a Marine whose strength hides a gentle heart, or through a young woman who discovers that even the most shattered souls can rise again. Maybe God sends these moments long before we ever walk into them. Maybe He places the right people and the right animal on our path at the exact moment we're about to give up. And maybe the storms we fear the most are the ones He uses to guide us toward the light we didn't know we needed. In our daily lives, we rush, we worry, we bend under the weight of things no one else sees. But stories like this remind us of something powerful. Compassion is never wasted, kindness is never forgotten, and love, no matter how fragile, can change the entire direction of a life. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need a little reminder that God is still working behind the scenes, even in silence. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if you believe that miracles still walk among us. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, hope, and the unexpected ways God sends help when we least expect it. May God bless you, protect you, and bring peace to your home, today and always. Amen.